Martin Lindstrom, marketing these days is all about big data. The evaluation and collection of data is something like a mantra for marketers. Now, you yourself are a marketer and a very successful one. Your latest book is a New York Times bestseller. Now, right now you're saying, forget about big data. How come?
Well, big data is all about analyzing numbers from the past and somewhat celebrating your past victories, but it's very rare you're able to predict the future based on past. I mean, you wouldn't flick through a photo album from the past and then start to predict what the future is all about. So what I've seen and what I've realized over the years working with brands across the world is that we need a sort of a compensation, a sort of a counterbalance to that. And that counterbalance is really what I call the causation. So where big data is all about the correlation, the causation is the reason why. You could say it's the hypothesis which you need as a data miner to mine those data and find out those amazing insights. But you can't just sit in a cloud somewhere, ask your analyst to analyze the data and come up with interesting hypotheses, because where should they start among all those billions of data points? And this is what we've been missing. So I think the business world today has come to a space where, oh yeah, the answer is big data. But the reality is we also realize we don't get a lot out of it. We have a lot of data, but not really any information, right?
And that's where small data comes in, right?
It is. The small data is really what I define as seemingly insignificant observations made in our lives. And it's basically all those emotional DNAs we leave behind ourselves, which are uncovering our personalities, our moods, and where we're out of balance. And it's the out of balance, that gap from being imbalanced to out of balance, which are defining the space for a new brand.
And how do you turn the seemingly insignificant observation into significant observation?
What you do is that you need in that process to give yourself the space where you're willing and open to listen and just observe. It is that space of observation, just like when Lego turned around the business some years ago, where they realized in 2003 the business was somewhat doomed. The big data was telling all the groups at Lego that the instant gratification generation would not have time to play with Lego, so they would change the size, among others, of the Lego bricks. Did a lot of other stuff as well. But as a consequence, the sales actually went down. They also realized this probably wasn't the answer to everything. So by visiting consumer homes across Europe, they, in one particular home belonging to an 11-year-old boy's parents, in his bedroom, they asked one important question: what are you most proud of? And this kid is answering and pointing to an old worn-down sneaker and saying, this is what I'm most proud of. And the group is very surprised about it, because they expected to hear the answer would be a Nintendo or something like that. But his answer was very interesting, because he also said, do you know why? And the answer was very simple: because he was the best skater in town. And as you slide down the skateboard, it creates a special mark on your shoes, and that became his trophy. And that was a moment where Lego realized that the time is not in essence among kids if you put them in the driver's seat, if you use storytelling as a device to engage them in play. And out of that, they changed the size of the Lego bricks again, they created the Lego Movie, and they did a lot of other stuff. But the story is very simple, because back then, they basically were following the overall big data trend of saying, well, we don't have attention anymore, to a realization that attention is true, it's just seen from a different angle. It's a completely different way you can get around that by telling stories. And the rest is history. Lego is today #1 in the world. So I think this is a good example, and of course there's a ton of examples out there, but it's a good example about how we need to wake up. We need to see the world in a more simple way.
So you do that a lot. You visit customers at their places.
Yeah. I do, and it's everything from when iRobot, which is the guys who's developed the Roomba, which is an amazing vacuum cleaning product, said to us one day, why do people actually buy those Roombas, and how come our sales is not booming all the time? And our feedback was very simple. Wonder if people actually are buying this because it's a vacuum cleaner, because it makes your life easy, because you can use your time somewhere else. What we realized by picking up small data was that typically people who had bought a Roomba had just lost their dog, their child was just moving away from home, they'd broken up with a girlfriend. In fact, the motivation was completely different. In fact, people would mostly display the Roomba in a corner where you could just see it, so it became a discussion or conversation point as you go into the home of consumers. Now, you wouldn't be able to find out that with big data. And then you will say, well, how does it help Roomba? Well, in a great way, because as engineers have become more advanced, they removed those cute noises the Roomba was creating. You know, in the old days, it would jump into, when it bounced into a sofa, it would say, oh, and when it was backing, it would say, do, 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 like a truck. Then they changed it to an automatic voice saying, warning, I'm driving into you. And the cuteness disappeared. And that animal child replacement type of feeling was just gone. It was just a robot, suddenly. So suddenly we realized that the brand, with good intention, having evolved down one technology path, actually gone too far, not realizing the essence of the brand was dying. And small data helped to at least put some focus on that.
Could you give us a bit more insight in how you actually work in other people's home? What are you looking for? I mean, you work like a detective maybe in a stranger's place. What is it that you're looking for?
Well, just as you're saying, when you pick up a nail or hair or fingerprint as a detective, I, in principle, are picking up what I call emotional DNA. And these seemingly insignificant observations and clues is everything from how a painting is hanging to how the shoes are placed on the floor to how you use your toothbrush, even how you stack your fridge. I mean, if you open a fridge, and by the way, very few people would open fridges. Here's just an insight, very interesting for you guys. When you think about it, how many of your friends actually would be prepared to open your fridge without your permission? Just do it. The number of people which are prepared to do that are your true friends. And that's a very interesting way to actually assess your friend level. You can't ask people about it, but when you go for an emotional transformation like that, you assess it. So the fridge is a very interesting area because it's very preserved somehow. And when I open fridges, I quite often realize there's what I call the conflicting mind present. Conflict mind is where you have all the fruit and vegetables and it's stacked beautiful with carrots and all that. And then you go down on your knees and you notice, hey, there's a regular Coca-Cola and there's a chocolate bar down there. And that's where you say one thing and you do something else. So every clue in your home tells a story about you. Every clue when you're out in a nightclub, shopping, whatever you do, is telling something about you. And these seemingly insignificant observations, those small data, cannot be picked up via big data. They can be picked up somewhere, but it never creates that holistic picture.
So in other words, you pick up that emotional DNA via experience and intuition. Is that what small data is about? Intuition?
Small data is partly intuition, because I have to say that when I went through the process of writing the book Small Data, I tried to break down intuition. And it's very difficult, as you can imagine, because intuition is an accumulation of experiences over time and you really rarely can connect the dots. You can just say, this is what I think. But as I went through this process over 10 years, I started to realize I actually could break down elements of intuition. So what I tried to write about in the book is really what makes me think that way and what do you do in order to fairly quickly go through certain steps so you also can create that skill set. The overall conclusion is very simple. Everyone can do it. We just need to be more present, and we're not very present today. But more than that, you need to link those small data with concrete conclusions and leading to the concepts. And I think finally we found that nice storyline and pathway which actually is linking small data to the concepts. And of course it's always been around, but I think probably for the first time ever there is a very clear process making it happen where it tends to actually be successful every time.
Did the prevalence of big data in marketing actually help you come up with the idea of this anthropological approach to marketing?
I think it teased me and it provoked me to take a stand and to be as dramatic as I am in my tone of voice right now. I think if big data would not have been around, I probably wouldn't have been as black and white as I am. I think the issue is at a board level, every CEO have been asked about big data and probably bought one or two of those things, unknowing what they really are getting. I've spoken to so many big data companies and time after time are saying to me, we're sick and tired of that solution, but that's what the clients want. And I think there's a lot of people who have been let down. And I think the reality is they bought all these big data solutions. And because it's so comprehensive and so overwhelming, and there's so many things you need to do in the system, you never really get to a solution. You sort of get to, we need to do more, we need to find out more, we need to analyze more, we need to back up those data which are backed up already. So I think everyone feels that in work in progress and never really getting there. Small data is really tangible. You actually get that straight away. And what I'm trying to do is really to mark it out to say, big data is not doomed to death. That's not what I'm saying. But I'm saying you really need the counterbalance, or else you will end up with having a tons of data but no information.
And how did your clients react when you first introduced them to the concept of small data? What did they say when you said, look, big data is fine, but it's not the whole story. Here's the missing link.
Well, here's the truth. It never happened because I've always worked this way. I just never thought about it as unique. And I fine-tuned it over so many years. I think we worked on this project for almost 20 years now. That's the reason why I have such an extraordinary amount of numbers of visits to consumer homes. I mean, I literally lived in other consumer homes for at least 2 years back to back. I mean, very few people doing the stuff I'm doing would have time to do that. So I never really realized I was building up a concept during that process. And when I engaged the clients, it was pretty natural to go into the homes. It's first over the last 1.5 years that I basically said, I want to brand this whole phenomenon. And I'll tell you why. When you are at a boardroom meeting and senior management saying we want a big data solution, it's very difficult to say, hey, we want to visit some consumer homes, because the answer will be, that's not very serious. No, we want to have serious data here. What I'm trying to do is to frame this whole phenomenon of putting in the human observation as well into the equation and create the counterbalance. And if you frame it that way, it's also acceptable from the CEO's point of view to be a little bit dumb here and say, guys, we taught a lot about this big data, but we also need the small data now to have a counterbalance. That has not been accepted in the past. No one has dared to ask that question. What is it called, that fairy tale with Hans Christian Andersen, The Empire's New Clothes, is that what it's called? It's a little bit where we are right now in that tendency. No one has said, but the king is naked. And that's a little bit what I'm doing right now.
Right.
So
what you're saying is big data isn't doomed. That means small data is not really an alternative to big data, but a companion.
It is a companion. It takes two to dance or to tango. And in many ways, this is like two partners in a dance, because the small data is all about the causation, the big data is all about the correlation. And I think time after time we're seeing now that if you jump too quickly into the correlations, you find correlations of correlations of correlations, and you end up with some results which, yeah, that's interesting, fascinating. I don't know where we're going to use it, but it's interesting stuff. And I think a good example of that is exactly what an American bank did some recently, where they concluded there was too much churn in the bank, and the conclusion was very simple. Customers were leaving because they didn't like the service. The small data revealed it was because people were getting through a divorce, so they had to separate their accounts. So the bank's approach to the customers should have been completely different than what it was. And this is a good example about not starting with the big data, but starting with the small data, doing the interviews, and then try to take that hypothesis and say, how do people separate their bank accounts when they're going through a divorce? What are the typical patterns they have? But here they didn't do it. They just started up with saying, people are leaving our bank, there's a problem.
I'd like to come back to a thing you said about moving in with people. Yeah. You've been living with strangers for 2 years, did I get that correctly?
Yeah.
How did they react to you?
Well, I have to say that, of course, it depends on where in the world it is. Some people are shy, but most people are intrigued. They are just as intrigued, in fact, more nervous than we are. Or less nervous than we are, because they suddenly have people who are interested in their lives. They ask all sorts of questions about things you actually are proud of, but which no one really gives any significance. And so we go into the homes we live within, we're curious about their life, we ask, why do you do that? And it makes them think too. So quite often people are leaving saying, I learned so much about myself here as well. And I think that is really the outcome of and the reason why I'm so energized by this, because I got to a stage of my life where I'm every day dressed naked, metaphorically speaking, and put into a home where I don't have a fancy business card. I'm not a fancy author. I'm not a guy helping Fortune 100 brands. I'm just Martin visiting an ordinary person, and we are at the same level. And that gives you a wake-up call every day, and that wake-up call is so healthy, because it makes you be grounded and it helps you to build your intuition, which is so much lacking today, right?
When you look back at these 2 years, what was the most amazing moment?
Oh wow, that's a good question. I think I'll give you a couple of examples. In the book Small Data, I'm writing a lot about my visit to Saudi Arabia, and how I probably was one of the first, if not the first, in history living with women in their homes and spending time in their homes without the husband, which is in principle deeply illegal, but which I did, and of course the men was informed by it later on, but it gave me an insight about how Saudis really live, because you see the backside of the story, and I learned a lot about how a whole society is somewhat screwed because of certain factors. Learned a lot about how fear is driving the society. I saw a very interesting picture in Russia as I was flying across Siberia. Siberia is amazing. I mean, we flew through Siberia over 7 days, and we had then passed by 7 time hours. So 7 hours difference, and we were half an hour away from Tokyo. And what I learned, among other, I'm just going to do a very summarizing version of this, but one of the things I learned was that Saudi Arabia and Russia is almost identical in consumer behavior. It sounds crazy, but it's true. We learned that the Russians are very introvert, they're not smiling a lot, they are isolating themselves, they're fearful of the community and the society and the government rulership, they're very addicted to brands, a lot of things. Exactly the same is the case in Saudi Arabia. So we start to draw these fascinating parallels between cultures which seems to be counterintuitive, like Italy and Brazil have strong parallels. So now when I'm going into a country X, I can actually predict how people are behaving in a completely different country, even though it's not classified as a classic BRICS countries or using the usual demographics criteria, right?
Is there a way you could break this down to a method?
Well, we have worked on this process of breaking down intuition in many ways down to a method which I call the 7C Manifesto. And I don't want to take you through all the different steps, but what it does is, first of all, it resets our mindset. This is really interesting. I think all of us believe we know our cultures very well. But a Japanese businessman once came to me and he said, Martin, how come you believe you understand the Japanese people so well? I mean, we don't even understand our own culture. And it's very challenging and very interesting and relevant question to ask. Well, my answer is very simple. When I went back to Denmark and visited some time ago, I had Paco Underhill, the author of Why We Buy, with me, and he said to me, Martin, people walk so unstructured on the street in Denmark. And I never thought about it before. I haven't lived there for a while, but still, I'm born and raised in Denmark, I should know. Because when you're too close to the forest, you can't see the trees. And I think the issue here is that we got to a point where we believe we know ourselves very well, but if you step aside and reset that filter you have in front of you, we actually see the world very differently. And how do you do that? You have a haircut. You go to the hairdresser. You talk to the hairdresser, you talk to the community leader, you talk to the football coach. If you're in a country where religion is very prominent, you go to the church leader. And you talk to all those people, and they will give you a very tangible, very concrete picture of how the local society is working. That will help you as a foundation to go into the homes, which is really the second step in the 7C Manifesto process, where you start to pick up those clues, right? So the first one is community resetting, the second is clue. And then you start to create and identify the causation. You go to the correlation and you go through that and you find the imbalances we have in our lives. And we all have imbalances. I mean, some people feel too overweight, some people feel they're not popular enough, they don't have a partner, whatever it is. We're searching for those imbalances, going through photo albums with permission. We go through the library of music and we can see these gaps in the interest throughout the years. And there suddenly there's an out of balance happening in the way you placed your fridge magnets, which suddenly is showing everything is concentrated about your memories in the Maldives, but you have nothing else. Is that the only time you dream and live yourself? What is it? When we find these out of balances, that's where the brand has opportunity, and that then leads to the concept development. So what we've done is to break down intuition into some very tangible processes, which are fairly easy to execute. It just takes some time to get used to it, because this is like everything else. If I put you on a bicycle you wouldn't be able to do it unless you really tried a couple of times and then suddenly you get used to it, right?
Martin, thanks a lot for sharing your insights with us.
Pleasure. Thank you.